Hi, I think we can see some participants coming on. Yeah, we can see 12:14. So we've got the attendees, John Libby, Otto, Tanya coming on board. It's lovely to have you. It's lovely to come and be part of this webinar. We want you to engage with us. David Chenery, hi, Barbara Osborne. Just so that we know that you can actually reach us, can you just type in, how's the weather with you today? I know it's getting a little bit dark, but how has it been today? Has it been bright and sunny? Has it been a little bit raining? We've had some people in Nairobi in Kenya a couple of times telling us about the weather there. Just type to us. How's the weather where you are?
Dark.
Dark. Oh, thanks, Marcus. It's dark where Marcus is. Anybody else brave enough to put something in the Q&A or the chat? Chilly. Lindsay, thank you. I mean, that's lovely. The weather's been fine and dry today, but now it's getting cold and dark. Lee, thank you. Anybody else? A chat disabled, but it's been bright most of the day. Murky, dry. Adam, thank you.
Sorry, the chat's disabled, but yeah, using the Q&A is fine.
Beautifully sunny. So here's the thing. Yeah, we know that you can come and talk to us if you want to during the session today. So please do. Please, feeding good in Doncaster, dry Adam, sunny over in Cumbria. It's lovely just to actually have you all on board. So we're gonna start now. We're gonna go for exactly 35 minutes, worth of talking, and then we're going to open up to a big question, a big conversation at the end of it. So we want to have engagement. This really started at the start of lockdown. We asked ourselves as a team, what was the best thing we could do? And we decided that actually we had skills in fundraising, in impact, in finance, in strategy that were going to be really needed in the upcoming COVID crisis. And so we set ourselves the task as, the 7 in the team, to actually have a conversation and to put it into conversations and some teaching and some training online so that people could come and join us in webinars. And so this is actually, I think now, the 23rd webinar that we've done. We've also done webinars with ACEVO, with the Institute of Fundraising, with Social Value UK, and also with Charity Finance Group. So we've really tried to push across a huge number of different organizations to really bring you some value, because we feel as practitioners it was important to give something back. Yeah, so I hope you've enjoyed our webinar series. This is the one that we're most excited about. Dan's pulled this together. I want to say thank you to Dan for pulling it all together, and it's going to be, if you like, a canter through some of our thoughts. Like the Von Trapp family, everybody's going to have a say as we go through things. And, it's just going to be hopefully just really interesting from such a difficult place at the start of March. We now find ourselves, 7-8 months later, with a real understanding of what's going on and real change going on in every part of, our charity sector. And so, we sent out a questionnaire. We asked people to find, feedback. Thank you for feeding back. What we're going to do today is we're going to take you through our learning. And we've also invited James Saunders, who's going to look from an audit point of view. So we've got a link from all of those different audit clients that we work with, and we're going to share all of that learning with you. Okay, so if I can just get the next slide, Dan, I think it is. What we're going to do is we're going to give some sector insights. We're going to go through the survey results, summary, and then open big messy conversation at the end. Please, questions as you go through. It just makes it far more interesting for us. Next slide. Now, I always talk around this in the order of impact, fundraising and finance. So this time I'm going to go the other way around. So, the things that the team does very quickly, financial management, costing, cost recovery, building finance models, but also getting into finance function reviews and looking at good practice in finance. Fundraisers, looking at strategic fundraising support, case for support, what we're going to talk about today, and impact, Carl, Penny, Helen, impact modeling, strategic decision making, stakeholder engagement. So that's, if you like, been the drill that we would normally go through. Now we're going to go into the main part of our talk today. So every member of the team is going to talk, and it's really important that they do, because they each have a voice and they've been through different insights with what's gone on with COVID-19 and how the sector has responded. And so we want you to hear that richness as we go through. So we're gonna start today's webinar by inviting James, from the audit point of view, what have you found through COVID-19? What's your learning been?
Yes, hello everyone. Thanks, Mark. Interesting literary reference there, Mark, with the Von Trapp family. And actually, when you said 7 in a team, it immediately brought to mind a certain Walt Disney cartoon. but to be honest with you, that I think that probably rather makes me Snow White. So I think perhaps we'll park that one and move on. On the subject, as a charity auditor, I think I probably come at this current situation from a slightly different perspective from the speakers who are going to follow me. My role is focused around examining charity finances and providing reassurance to a charity stakeholders that the finances are being accurately recorded and reported. But of course, inevitably, the auditor's role has expanded in this period as more difficult financial and accounting matters have arisen. Something like the furlough scheme, for example, needs thought on both implementing it in the here and now, and then also reporting it consistently across the sector. So the challenges on our clients, and indeed the whole charity sector, have, needless to say, been huge. The conversations that I've been having in this period, both with clients in meetings and with charity sector professionals in webinars like this one, have most often focused on governance and financial resilience, probably the two key areas that most financial and management boards have been dealing with regularly. But also we've covered fundraising and the challenges associated there and the future of the sector and even strategic direction in the C19 period. But the overwhelming sentiment from the discussions in the vast majority of these sessions is one of uncertainty. There are so many unknowns in the near future. When will this virus stop bringing our lives to a grinding halt? When will society and also when will work get back to normal, and what will those normals look like? And will our organisations look and perform and operate and be needed in the same way as they were before? And it is, of course, key to get insight and feedback from our clients and the sector as a whole. As we're about to see in this session, it'll be really interesting to hear from the MKSFM team what the key feedback is from the sector at this stage. It's been a strange time for charities, of course, in terms of finances, because, well, not least, there is a gathering suspicion, I think, that even though with the very welcome and encouraging news this week regarding an effective vaccine being on the horizon, but to an extent, the worst may well be yet to come. Charities like commercial businesses have had significant protection from the absolute worst case impact of the recent economic shutdown. But what on earth do 2021 and 2022 look like for the sector? Public finances are going to be hit for years to come. Money for the charity sector could be contracting through the next 2 years at least, while demand for services has increased. That mid-year report from Pro Bono Economics forecast a £10 billion funding gap in the second half of 2020 for the charity sector, highlighting the paradox, I think, that charities will find their services more in demand, but also their income dropping. A rise in demand at £3 million and a drop in income of £7 billion results in that £10 billion gap. And you have to ask whether that gap has now increased in light of our current second lockdown. But back to my role as a charity auditor, we've been focusing with our clients more than ever on forecasts for the year ahead, and it's difficult for most trustees to really be budgeting positively and confidently right now without a major element of hope in there. Hope that some of the lucky few to get a piece of the government funding pie, which we already know is too small, or hope that some new income stream will prove successful, either fundraising or service provision, and hope in that V-shaped recovery, which now is looking like a W or all sorts of funny shapes, but the recovery which will create wealth and generate positive national economic results and help private philanthropy while also reducing that burden of increased demand for services. So, in conclusion, I'll be interested to see if your lessons learned through the period and the survey results chime with those experiences.
So thank you. If I'm one of the 7 dwarves, then James, I'll be grumpy today. Is that all right?
Yes.
So no, I thank you, James, because I wanted the audit perspective to be brought in, because we do work with so many different organisations, and we're privileged in that we do have that umbrella view as Moore Kingston Smith to be able to see. So hopefully it's going to chime with James, and what we're going to talk about, links into that. The first thing I just wanted to talk about was the pro bono economics report. The pro bono economics report said that a 10 billion shortfall in terms of funding would be hitting the sector. That is a 10 billion on a sector that's about 42 billion in size. So we're talking 25% of the finances of organizations. And so, what we've seen is actually organizations, first of all, focusing on the money. And the swing, it's always difficult, isn't it, in social purpose organizations to get the balance right between impact and finance. But what we've seen is that dial swing very much more towards the money. Yeah. And then finally, halfway through, and now our survey, I think, has borne it out, organizations are now trying to get back, as I've highlighted in red here, to this balance between money and impact. So whereas money was dominating the agenda up front, a lot of organizations are now, if you like, sort of tilting back the other way to try and say, hang on, we've got to focus on our beneficiaries. We have to help our clients and our service users. We have to think about impact. Yeah. And so you can see the stat at the top from our survey, 68% of respondents have tried new ways to engage. Only 15% haven't tried anything new. That's incredible. So, we have tried, for example, using IT, using technology to engage with people in different ways that we haven't tried before. We've had to adapt services that we didn't know. We've had to, if you like, make up new services and evolve. So I think, the big thing for me has been the spirit of trial and, also doing everything we can to help our beneficiaries. I think the second bullet point is really interesting for me. There are so many things we should have done before. We should have invested in technology. We could have invested in for example, our infrastructure. We could have stopped certain work that it was not profitable and it wasn't really creating impact. So why were we doing it? I think that COVID-19 has given us a chance to start to ask those difficult questions and doing some of the things we could have done before. And I think that from the clients that we have, about 50% want to survive and are asking us, how do we survive? But 50% are asking, okay, we can survive, but how do we evolve? How do we maximize the change and the impact we have for those we serve? In other words, our beneficiaries. But the bottom bullet point there is for me the most fascinating, is this liberation of red tape. And quite a lot of organizations express the fact that government had bound them in red tape before. Actually, we've been able to move so fast in the interim without a lot of the red tape. It's just been liberating to be able to move that quickly. So overall, we have seen some organizations that have struggled to survive, but we've also seen a lot of new ways to engage, a lot of positivity, yeah, which is not what I expected to be saying today. Yeah, so I find that really interesting and really heartening. I'm going to pass on then. First of all, we're going to talk about the main thing and keep the main thing the main thing. So we're going to talk about impact. So why don't I pass over to the impact team to talk you through some of the things that we found from our impact work.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to start us off here talking a little bit about some of the lockdown learnings from an impact perspective, as Mark's just mentioned. So sort of an encouraging headline figure is that from the survey that we ran, nearly 80% of people came back and said that impact measurement was a priority for them and their organizations. So said that was a really great finding. As an impact practitioner, I would hope to see that percentage increase. But certainly for now, it's excellent. And I guess just pausing there for a second on that and going back to what Mark's just talked about, a key question to ask is, why is impact measurement so important and why is it so crucial now? And as Mark mentioned, a key theme at the moment is change for so many organizations as they adapt, and certainly for the foreseeable future. a lot of organizations are going to be having to make big decisions about how they change and evolve. And as social purpose organizations, sort of our reason for existence is to create change and positive change and impact in the world. You know, surely these decisions need to be driven by asking the question, how can we create the biggest impact with the resources that we have? And in order to make those informed decisions, we need to have a good understanding of how we're creating impact. And we can only have that understanding if we're measuring our impact. So going back to the statistic, as I said, nearly 80% say it's a priority. It's either important or extremely important to them or their organization. Yet interestingly, only 50% of respondents say they have clear measures in place aimed at reporting and improving impact. So of course, therein lies an issue. We have a cognitive dissonance between attitudes and behaviors, quite a significant gap really. People believing that it's really important, but not necessarily taking effective action when it comes to measuring their impact. So again, the second question really is we need to think about is why this gap exists. What are the barriers that are preventing organizations from being able to measure their impact effectively? And that some of those, Carl and Helen, my colleagues, will talk to in the next slide.
Thanks, Penny. So yeah, on this slide, one of the other questions in the survey that we asked was about what the main concerns or the main issues were for respondents. And as Penny said, this offers us a little bit of a guide to understand kind of why people might not be kind of reaching the state of measuring and managing their impact that they think is really, really important. And when we're looking at this table, we can almost divide it into two categories. So the majority of items on there are to do with the kind of technical and methodological side of measuring impact. And there's one there that's much more to do with the cultural approach to sort of embedding measurement into the organisation, which Carl will talk about in a minute. But just to take a moment to look at these technical issues here, the top three issues at the very top of the table are all around outcomes or changes. So we've got firstly identifying what the outcomes are that stakeholders are experiencing, and then going about measuring them and valuing them, understanding this sort of the relative importance for the stakeholders. And again, this is a little bit paradoxical for me, because on one hand, I think it's really good actually that a lot of organizations are focusing on this as a main concern or an issue. It shows that we're moving past what used to be a theme in impact reporting, which is focusing exclusively on outputs, numbers of people, numbers of services taking place and things. There's a clear theme that organizations are understanding that that's not enough anymore, and we need to move beyond that and actually focus on the outcomes. But really what this table is telling us is that the technical and the sort of the methodological knowledge and application of that knowledge isn't quite there yet. At the bottom of the table, we've got engaging with stakeholders. So this was the kind of the least common issue in a sense, but we can still see that there's over a quarter of organizations that are sort of thinking about this as a bit of an issue or a concern for them. So yeah, I thought that was a really interesting set of results, and I think going forward it'll give us a lot of food for thought as a team and how we can kind of help the sector a little bit more.
Thanks, Helen. I'm Carl. I just wanted to talk then to this particular aspect, and the people who have concern about embedding impact measurement into the organisation. Well, organisations are quite sophisticated things, aren't they? So it's no surprise that there are cultural differences within organisations. I know that before COVID, when we were sitting down, as we do, to have conversations with organisations to think about their work in impact, one of the big concerns also was getting buy-in in the organisation in order to get a whole feel for why you would do this as an organisation. So getting buy-in, from the top down really, and then looking horizontally across the organisations. You will know there's probably different sections within an organisation who have very different interests in what impact will tell them. For a larger organization, your PR department, for example, will probably be very interested in the positive messaging, whereas your planning department might want to look at both the positive and negative aspects of impact in order to plan future services. So, what would we say that you do? What's a simple thing that you can do in order to sort of breach these cultural differences? One of the things we talk about in the impact world is, defining and agreeing language within your organization, to actually understand impact. And those of you who have been to, some of our previous webinars in impact, you'll remember the structure we put up, kind of an impact structure. And just take two aspects of that. Look at outputs and outcomes. Now, I know this sounds simple, but a really good thing to do is look at the interrelationship between your outputs and your outcomes. Why is that the case? How often do you sit down and think, which activities are we engaged in? What part of those activities could we actually cut away and still end up with the same or similar outcomes? It can be quite a useful analysis process, and I suspect it's not something we often do. So, what have we learned from COVID around thinking about outputs and outcomes? It's when you're able to actually analyze some of these things, then you're in a position to see whether or not your outcomes have diminished, for example. Is there a need for the short-term outcomes that you need to meet an emergency situation that COVID has brought about for us? There's a whole range of things that were kind of bundling around, if you remember, back in March and April and May, when things were really very difficult, and organizations have really had a difficult time in coming through that. And yet, as James said, we're looking to the next couple of years and what that will bring. Back to this idea of outputs and outcomes, we kind of almost preach, it's almost evangelical in our world that we ask people to focus on outcomes. But let's turn that on its head for once. Let's look at outputs, because it's your activities that lead to change. And often, particularly during this very difficult time, we've had to have a definite focus on changing activities to meet the situation. And again, then we're caught between achieving the short-term outcomes as a result of those activities and something that will sustain us a bit longer. I just want to talk very quickly about really on an example of organizations having to create a shift in their outputs, as I say, as opposed to thinking about outcomes. One is an organization we're working with right now, and it's having to shift its outputs quite radically. It's an organization that works with young disabled adults, and the whole idea of the outcome that they're chasing is to move these young adults out into the community once their education has finished. So housing, for example, and finding housing is an issue. And one of the interesting things that they've had to do is move their entire education delivery online, because of course they can't have the face-to-face education that they would normally have. So one of the interesting things they found is that it's easier to have a housing meeting on Zoom than actually meet people in real life. I thought that was fascinating, because you can get the area manager, you can get the parent, the student themselves, maybe someone from the college. You can actually get them online, whereas that's not so easily apparently to achieve in real life. Maybe it's to do with travel time and all the things we've become used to. So, there's an outcome that has resulted, from the situation we're in. Another one, very briefly, has been that these young people have been able to continue to achieve their qualifications. That's partly to do with the government changing the framework that has, made ongoing work more acceptable for the final assessment. But tutors have been telling us that they've been able to set goals and get students to prepare presentations and so on. This has all been done online, and it has continued to achieve the qualifications that they would normally set out to achieve. However, it's not all sweetness and light for this organisation, because students who struggle with IT and access to IT and maybe don't have the help at home to access that, they're in danger of being left behind. So again, there's an issue about changing the output to achieve the outcome, changing the way that the organisation has to relate to those students who are not just so au fait with IT. So an impact framework that we have talked about gives a tool for real granular analysis that you wouldn't normally have. And finally, I'm just going to refer to another element of the structure, which is the whole input side. If you can actually work out what your outcomes cost as a result of knowing up-to-date management information on cost and so on, then you're really in a very powerful position to think about how you can make that more efficient going forward.
Excellent. Thank you, Carl. So having covered the impact side of things, we're then moving on to the finances, how you actually pay for that impact that you're achieving. And one of the questions that we asked was here about, do you present all costs associated with projects? There was a real split in the types of organizations that responded to this question, and the real division came between those that were contract organizations and those that were fundraising organizations. And there was a much higher confidence in the financial sustainability overall from fundraisers than there was from contracting organizations. And there was also increased confidence in their ability to recover those costs, whether or not they count them. And this was interesting because the contracting organizations have been feeling this squeeze, and this is not just a COVID-19 pandemic issue. This has been going on for a decade or more at this point, in the age of austerity, where contract-driven organizations have had their local authority funding cut and cut and cut and cut. And as they felt that squeeze, they have increasingly been trying to move towards fundraising to try and fill that gap. They were still pretty positive in our survey about their overall financial sustainability, but I think it's worth caveating at this stage that if you are being positive about your future financial sustainability, if you're relying on fundraising as the means to do that and to plug that gap, are you being aware of the time lag of fundraising? You know, if you're investing £20,000 this year and are looking to get a 4-to-1 return to plug an £80,000 gap that you have, the chances are this year you're not going to get that 80,000 straight off the bat. There's going to be a time delay there to setting up that income. And equally, there's still the volume of contracts that you need to get in to be paying for your overheads, where if you're getting 10% of your contracts, say, to pay for your central service costs, you need to be getting a certain number of those contracts to make sure you've covered all of your overheads, or fundraising are having to pick up that tab, as it were, to save it going from to reserves. So those are two things to still be aware of when just being overall positive about your financial sustainability, but also the methods with which you may be trying to fill that gap if you do have a funding gap. But in terms of presenting all costs, we had 2 in 5 of respondents were exhibiting what we would describe as poor costing practice, where they were leaving out costs or cherry picking costs on different bids. And the way that we see this is that if you're not including those costs in your bids, then of course you're never going to get that money for them. And so you're instantly pricing in a gap in what it costs you to run your service and what you're bringing in there. And interestingly, those organizations that were within the 2 out of 5 who were exhibiting poorer costing practices also tended to be those organizations that were less confident about their financial sustainability. So there was a real correlation between actually effectively costing your services and then having that confidence or knowledge that you have covered all of your costs in here, leading to better confidence in your financial sustainability. But the key takeaway from this particular slide here is just how important it is to be keeping on top of your numbers and to be knowing your numbers and margins, being better at costing your different services, but making sure that you're costing those services accurately, or as accurately as you can, including its relevant portion of overheads, to try and get you that true cost of the service. Otherwise, you're not working with a transparent picture of those different services. And then on the next slide here, we talk about actually recovering those different costs. And 2/3 of all the organizations who responded here, we can see, don't recover much of their costs, or recover barely any of them. And this is, again, very interesting to see that correlates quite well with those that were not including all of their costs in their particular in their budgets or in their services. And the thing here is that, are you doing that in a transparent manner? Because if you're not recovering all of your costs, then that's fine. You may have made that conscious decision that fundraising is going to plug that gap, or we are going to spend our reserves over the next couple of years while this service sets up. But unless you are doing that in a transparent manner, you run the risk of running into issues there. So the little diagram that I have in the middle here is having your actual budget versus what the donor will pay, leading to that gap, and having that gap really transparently laid out and then signed off, so that you can say with clarity and with confidence that on any given one of your services, you know what that gap is and you know where you are paying for that gap from. Because if everyone is working in individual silos, it's very easy for different projects or services to be covering all of their direct costs and thinking things are going fine, whereas in actual fact you have this lump of core overhead, say, that is being subsidized from somewhere else, but is not being done so transparently. And so you can sleepwalk into having a running deficit year on year without really being aware of where you're paying for that from, and how you're potentially planning to try and turn that around. So the main learning from this bit here is that cost recovery still needs improvement, as we can see over 2/3 of those that responded still weren't recovering all of their costs, but that to recover your costs, you need to know them first of all. And then if you aren't actually able to recover all of those costs, make sure you are signing off that gap in a transparent manner, that you aren't just blindly subsidizing different services or different projects without knowing where you're finding that money from.
Great, thank you very much, Marcus. So I guess taking James' analogy a little bit further, maybe I'll have to be sneezy in the Seven Dwarfs story, but especially as I managed to sneeze without moving my mouth. So I'm going to take a view from a fundraising perspective, and picking up from my colleagues. And one of the things that we did see was that the results from the fundraising perspective were very mixed. There were clear concerns about falling income, but it wasn't true across the board. And one of the reasons for that, I guess, is picked up by Marcus already, looking at the different types of organizations, those that are true fundraising organizations and those that are not fundraising organizations or solely fundraising organizations, but do contracting as well. And the challenges that there have been in terms of changing income streams as the pandemic has hit, and as the shift that there's been over a number of years has increased the challenge of contracting organizations trying to find funding from elsewhere, and to try and do that quickly and during a pandemic, and with social distancing, a recession, and uncertainty about a future is very difficult to do indeed. So there have been very mixed outcomes in terms of where income is going, but we did see that there was a clear correlation between the non-profits income level changes during the year and the state of their fundraising strategy. I guess it shouldn't be a major surprise that those charities that were used to fundraising have done more to refine their strategies since the pandemic has hit. That they have strategies in place and they are making them, revisiting them and keeping them live. And those charities have managed to pivot their efforts to help them to see their income stabilize, stay the same, or even increase. And it was surprising that, but somewhat gratifying to know that 25% of the charities that responded in our survey had actually seen their income go up since March, rather than go down as you might have expected. So that that 10 billion gap that James and Mark have talked about isn't universal, as somebody said in a webinar I was listening to yesterday. We're all trying to weather the storm, but we're not all necessarily in the same boat. So lastly, I want to mention the fact that we also saw a link between the non-profits' hopes of surviving this financial year and the currency of their case of support. And in a moment, Emma's going to talk about cases for support in more detail. But in our work with charities over recent months, we've seen that it's the more strategic ones that are managing to weather the storm better. A good fundraising strategy aligns your efforts to find donors with sufficient wealth, sufficient warmth to your cause, and with whom you have sufficient access. So wealth, warmth, and access remain important even during a pandemic. But what we've seen is that the pandemic has made access more difficult. So fundraising strategies that rely on techniques with low access ratings, such as street collections, raffles at events, or even sponsored challenges have been less successful. And looking forward, when recession hits further, we expect that strategies that are relying on low wealth ratings will also struggle as wealth becomes hit more. So one of the lessons that's important to learn is that now it's really a time to ensure that you are looking at your fundraising strategy and making sure that it fits the changing world that we're living in.
Thanks, Dan. So I'm the last of the 7 dwarfs. I'm trying to think of who I would be, probably Bashful or something like that. I don't think I know all of them, but yeah, that would be my one. Anyway, back to the presentation. I wanted to end the survey piece surrounding fundraising, really at looking at some of the external insights that back up what Dan was saying in terms of that sort of need for case for support. So just looking at some work that Blue Frog undertook actually in terms of going out there and surveying donors and just looking at what the outlook is at the moment. There was evidence that came out showing that actually, I mean, the positive thing is donors aren't going to be offended if you ask them at the moment. So even though times are tough, if they are unable to afford to give to the charity, they're not going to be offended if you ask them, and that's not necessarily going to mean that they don't support you again. So we can still keep asking as fundraisers. Also, I'm sure we all know this is quite an obvious point, but there's more disposable income out there for certain people in society, because there are less opportunities out there to actually spend the money that's in their pockets. So there's an opportunity there for fundraising. But the key really around these positive messages are that donors are really expecting charities to have, really clear plans in terms of how they're going to respond to the situation in the here and now. And this is why making your case for support is so vital at the moment. And because things are changing all the time, it's about refreshing that case support on a regular basis and making sure that it's fit for purpose for the here and now. So it's not sort of a static document that you look at again sort of every 1 or 2 years. It's something that you are reviewing on a really regular basis, because that's what donors want at the moment. And just on the left hand side of the slide deck there, I've just tried to condense some of those learnings so that everyone can read them in their own time. The other area that we looked at in terms of insights was looking at the trust and foundation area in terms of those trusts and foundations that are actually, you know, the givers. And really there's, I think, a positive movement around moving away from, you know, planning, delivery and assessment, that kind of quite static model, and being a bit more kind of a bit more of a movable feast in lots of ways, in terms of being adaptable to charities, and for charities to be able to change some of their projects, which is really encouraging, I think, for the fundraisers out there. But what does that mean? What that does mean is that charities really need to be on top of their game, and they know about the current situation, and that they are reviewing and amending things as they go forward. And I guess lastly, I just wanted to end by saying that, you know, a lot of the things around what Dan and I were describing in terms of, you know, the case for support and things being up to date, it's really about making sure that you're articulating your impact really, really well. And just following on from Marcus's point, knowing how much that service is going to cost as well, and knowing the full cost of that service, so that you're able to communicate to your donors actually how much money you need in order to deliver your service at a true cost. And I think that's the end of our survey session. So I'm just going to hand over to Mark, who's going to summarise our session, and then we're going to move on to a Q&A with everyone.
So thank you, Emma, and also thank you everybody. We could have done a session on every single person speaking for an hour, because you know, they're just passionate, and the team is passionate about what they do, and also just the learning has been so profound. And when you start to reflect on what we've been through, you know, as a sector over the last 7-8 months, and, you know, actually what we do to help those that we work for, I just want to say a big thank you to everybody on the call on behalf of the beneficiaries, clients, service users, and how we've actually you know, move forward helping. And you can see from the team, we have a perspective, if you like, from impact, from finance, from fundraising, and bringing it all together in a strategy is really important. Yeah. So I'm going to start with the learning. What I've learned through, you know, lockdown is everybody's focused so much on the money. Yeah, so much on the money, because they have to be. Let's start with impact. So when we start our thinking, let's start with the impact. But what I'm also seeing is this Charles Handy piece playing out. Now, Charles Handy is just an incredible economist who came and gave a talk at CAS, and I had the pleasure of listening to him. And he's just said he's an older guy who just really enjoys thinking, and also just putting things really simply. And he just said, look, every organization goes through a life cycle. You can see the blue curve. Everything builds and then comes to a point where it then will start to drop off. The real skill is being able to reinvent yourself at the right time. And so, you know, stop doing things that aren't profitable. Yeah, have a mandate now, because things are tough, to stop doing things that you couldn't have dreamt of stopping before. Investing in technology, changing the way we do things, and focusing to make things more impactful, and then being able to drive out for the future. I think that's the big message that you know, we really wanted to give you today. Yeah. So that's it in terms of the survey and our learning. We're just, as I say, get your questions ready. We're going to come back and ask you. We also asked a lot of questions in the survey about webinars. As I say, we've done 23, I think it is today, impact finance fundraising strategy with some, you know, big named umbrella, you know, organizations, Institute of Chartered Accountants, ACEVO, Institute of Fundraising and Social Value UK. All of these are still online. If you want to go back and you want to re-listen to them, please do. But what it's shown us, we're getting 100 people per webinar on different topics, or, you know, all of these different things. We want to continue to give to the sector. We want to continue to do more of these, but we'll also start offering, you know, some in-depth training sessions for the future, where we have more time to explore, we have more time to talk. And I just think that it's something that actually people want. Yeah. And, you know, the team has been practitioners before. We've all worked in different organizations. We've all run different charities before. I think we have something unique in that to be able to offer back to the sector, because we can cross over both being, if you like, consultants and practitioners and working within organizations. So I'm going to draw us through to the last slide before we go for some questions, and we just have a bit of fun. We open it up. So the last slide, Dan, is just about us and our work. we've created a service catalogue for the first time about what are the services we, offer. Please, when you get that, have a look at it. If we can help you in any way, we're more than happy to. As I say, part of the work that we do is giving to the sector. That's why we've done these webinars. On the consulting side, if we can help you with any of these knotty issues that you have, please come and talk to us. So I just want to close on one final funny thing, yeah? And I just want to reflect on the fact that all the way through, we've done this by, webinar, and that relies on the internet. And so sometimes the internet has to break. And on the odd occasion, I've just said to anybody involved on the webinars as part of the team, just keep talking. So I want to thank everybody who, the 7 dwarfs here. Well, I'm not Snow White for sure, I'm grumpy. But out of all of us, just the ability to keep talking and keep stepping in for others in the team when actually the line has gone dead has been brilliant. Marcus, you spoke absolute wonders. I don't know what you were talking about, but it was brilliant for 5 minutes. But at the same time, it's just been for us entertaining, and also we've relied on your involvement and those listening to really make it a success. So with that, I'm gonna pass over to you as participants. I'm going to pass over to James as our panelist, if you like, who's going to take the questions. Let's just have a chat. We've got 10-15 minutes. What questions or comments, anything that you think we've just totally missed? And I suppose Dan has also pulled together a lovely Word document which goes further into these different areas, so you can read that at your leisure and share that with your colleagues. So James, we might want to turn off actually the PowerPoint and just actually have like sort of us in like sort of large, if you like. James, over to you. So what questions from the audience?
There's only one at the moment, which is actually not a question. It's from Amy Ingram saying she loves a full session on adapting case for support. So that's obviously piqued someone's interest there with that. So we'll come back on that. At the moment, that's the only one I think. I mean, while you're all thinking, I've got a couple that have come up. I was scribbling away during there. Carl, and to an extent, Penny and Helen, I think, on the impact side. Carl, who forever to me is now going to be Doc. But is it different looking at impact in the C19 period? Has it been different looking at impact in this COVID-19 period than in a normal period?
Well, there's a couple of aspects to that. Organisations wanting to implement impact are still facing the same problems. There's still issues around in terms of resources and how you invest in the process. So it hasn't been different from, if you like, a methodological point of view. What has been different has been the focus on effort. When you're up against things and you're watching your television every night where you can see evidence of people in real trouble, and organizations that are able to lend themselves to meet that emergency situation, then it's possible to make this connection between what it is you need to do and what the outcomes are likely to be if you do that. On the other hand, there's other types of organizations, James, who just didn't have that kind of shape, to their structure in order to, deliver change. For them, you still need to think long term about how impact can help you make your case. But it's perhaps, during C19, you could forgive people for thinking that wasn't a priority.
Okay, thanks. Excellent. Dan's actually posted, we had a question by email about seeking grants if you weren't working on COVID-related projects at the moment, and all the grants seem to be emergency ones. So Dan, have you got a response to that one?
I have actually. That's the one that Howard has just put into the box anyway. So, yeah, thanks for sending that in earlier, Howard. And I mean, obviously, it is a challenge. I guess there are sort of two things for that. One is that some grant makers are starting to come out of their emergency funds focus at the moment. There have been a few which we've been looking at for some of our clients in the last month who sort of in the end of October, beginning of November have said now they're ready to start making grants again, and they are doing normal sort of grants. So that's good. There's not enough of those, granted, but there are some that are doing that. So so there is some funding out there. It's just going to be a lot of competition when it comes to that. The other thing, I suppose, is to try and be somewhat lateral in your thinking, and to think about how COVID has actually affected your organization. And you may not be delivering completely your sort of set piece COVID type services, but you may be doing something which COVID has had an impact on that. And if that is the case, then you have a legitimate reason to go for some of the emergency funds. And now many organizations have already been there and already asked. It's possibly your chance of being successful would be increased at this time. So just two thoughts on that.
Super, thanks, Dan. Steve Mann posted a question, probably Mark, it's probably best directed at you initially. Do you think the rate of change has now slowed as we start to come out of lockdown?
It's a great question. Hi, Steve. It's interesting because the survey results, before the survey results, I would have said, actually, it's probably slowed. You know, it's not picked up. In my thinking, people had been wanting to change, they're now implementing change. But actually things had slowed down a little bit. The survey showed none of that. The survey showed that, for example, 25% had been trying new things and had made that stick. But the bulk of people, you know, the bulk of organizations, let's say over 40% actually, were accelerating and actually going through trying new things, you know, in other words, just trying them. And then they needed to make full-scale change happen after that. So I think what you're seeing at the moment is an immediate reaction to COVID, where people have gone, right, we've got to change immediately, yeah, and we've got to respond in this emergency bit. Now you'll see the tail of really different thinking as people adapt to the new world, yeah. So I think, you know, if anything, it'll be more thoughtful change and more considered and if you like, sort of, you know, planned change. But at the same time, I think it's going to accelerate. Okay. I don't know what you think, James. I mean, you know,
yeah, I agree. Marcus, did you want to add in anything on that one? I think, did you have some thoughts?
No, I mean, Mark covered that one pretty extensively. I do agree that there was an initial flurry of change at the start of lockdown, and that as people have become more comfortable with this new way of working, that change has potentially slowed and hasn't necessarily got the impetus that it had at the start. But it'll be interesting to see whether a lot of those initially planned changes do continue to actually be put into practice once things start to go back to whatever the new normal looks like.
Okay, excellent, thanks. John Libby actually has asked one which seems to be directed at me more than anyone else, which makes me slightly uncomfortable. Curious, in the area of forecasting in the environment from a strategic planning and audit perspective, what range of expectations are you seeing across the fundraising sector, and what is acceptable in terms of going concern? Well, I mean, it's a slightly wider question on going concern as an auditor. Of course, you know, the going concern fundamentally says, are you going to be around in 12 months' time from when you're from any one point in time? I think really the question is whether you can cut your cloth according to that fundraising reduction that you are going to be suffering, and whether you have control over your spend and your upcoming expenditure, whether you have control over your projects or not. I mean, if your fundraising is cut and you simply don't think that you can cut your costs to accommodate, well, you're going to be struggling then, aren't you? So it really is tied in with several other aspects as well, I think.
Can I just make one quick comment on that? Yep. Forgive me. It's a great question again, and what the research that I've seen from Cass Business School has shown is that it's predictable income streams. It's not just any old income stream, because if it's random, you can't plan. It's got to be predictable income stream. So I take it further and say, which parts of your fundraising can be predictable in this difficult environment. So actually, it's quite complex.
Yeah, agreed. Sally Knight, hello Sally. She's asked, what are the additional skills, insight, experience charity FD staff now need to find in order to address those extra challenges you raise, redefining then and then measuring impact? One of the impact team, Carl, Helen, Penny, anyone fancy it? Helen looks like she's ready to go.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I think it's a really good question, and one of the things that I would highlight, which sort of ties into some of the other sort of financial and fundraising themes, is I think we need to become comfortable with being sort of agile, and also recognizing that impact isn't always a long-term thing. Actually, what we're going to see is changes in people's employment statuses, in people's income, in people's needs day to day, fuel poverty over the winter, and so on and so forth. And so for me, one of the priorities that organizations need to be thinking about from an impact perspective is how they can quickly and effectively capture information from their stakeholders about what their needs are, and then secondly about whether they're actually serving those needs or not, and if they're not, making sure that they can adapt and change to make sure that they're meeting those needs. So I think the main skills are going to be much more kind of cultural ones about adapting, as well as these really sort of snappy, how do you capture data, how do you sort of send surveys out, or do telephone interviews, or whatever it is that you need to do to capture data in an effective way for you to be able to change course depending on what your charity's aims are and how those will change according to the changing environment.
Very good. Anything else from you, Carl or Penny, on that?
No, I think that's a great answer. We could just briefly, I could say, we could wax lyrical about the range of skills to do impact stuff really properly. There's a range of things you need: IT skills, interviewing skills. There's a range of stuff. Understanding metrics, being able to apply financial information to particular metrics and situations. We could make this sound very complicated, but actually the simple answer is talk to your people, talk to stakeholders, talk to your staff group about the internal messaging you need to think about to get your impact thoughts right through the organization. But what Helen said about talking to stakeholders is absolutely key.
And I think it's really interesting that Sally has said here that it's experience and skills needed for charity FDs, because this shows how, as a charity finance director, you need to not be looking just in finance. To be measuring impact, you need to be looking outside of finance and being a strategic business partner to the rest of the organization, and moving up that skill tree. There's a slide that Mark and I very nearly included about exactly that, saying that finance directors at the top need to be moving away from the day-to-day transaction processing and controls and moving into the more strategic business partnering, looking outside of finance within the rest of the organization. And so this perfectly highlights that.
Excellent. I think we're probably 6 or 7 minutes over. So Mark, I guess at that point we'll hand back to you. Wrap up.
I was going to say that was the best Bambo Gascoigne or the best Jeremy Paxman that we've had on this in years. So James, thank you for hosting the questions for us. That's been fantastic. 2 final thanks to everybody here. Just thank you for engaging with us. We've had I think about 1,200, 1,500 people come through our webinars. No, it must have been more than that. About 2,000 people. There's a good half of those that have never actually been part of MKS before or what we do. I hope you really enjoyed the engagement. The second thing is we're going to continue to have fun. Yeah, we're going to try and make these things interesting, and push the boundaries forward. If we don't make it interesting, then people will just turn off. So we're going to try to keep it interesting and relevant. The final thing is just to the panelists here and Dan for pulling the day together. Thank you so much. Yeah. And also go be brilliant and go and make change in the world. So thank you very much indeed.